Welcome everyone back to this episode of Growing Money with Sean Trace, but our money school with the absolutely awesome and super cool Professor Heath. Professor Heath, welcome back, man.
Thanks. Been a while. It's nice to see you.
It has.
Mission Impossible.
Mission Impossible, man. Yeah, I was just saying I got to go to that premiere and it was pretty rad. But you know what? It did remind me of you know, um, well, there's a couple things that I want to pull in since we're bringing that movie in. Tom Cruise did some insane stunts in that movie. And when everyone asks, you're like, dude, Tom, how can you pull that off? One of the things that I was reading about is there's this biplane chase scene, which is literally about as insane as you can get in film.
Yeah.
You know, we're so used to CGI. This was not that. This was
Really?
Tom Cruise on a damn plane and it just being insane, you know? But one of the things is when they asked Tom about how he, I've read this article about it and they asked him about how he prepped for that. And he's like, it's been 10 years in the making, you know?
No
He had
kidding.
this idea and he's just putting the pieces in place for 10 years. Learned to fly a plane. He learned to fly a plane. Learned how to fly an old school plane. Got that, you know?
Yeah.
Putting all the pieces in place and checking these things off as he went. And then finally, for the immediate prep of the movie, it was like a year and a half of learning to walk on an airplane's wings, because that used to be a thing, was biplane walking, because they're moving so slow. You can actually move around on the wings. I mean, and relatively slow. We're not talking fighter jet speed like he was doing in Top Gun, but
Totally.
it's still about 100 miles an hour on the wing of a plane, you know?
From what I remember, when he filmed, what was the sequel that he just recently filmed? The other sequel, Top Gun. Apparently, he learned how to fly in that movie for that movie. So it doesn't surprise me that he continued on and now is learning other aerial things. It's just like a natural progression in his career arc. So.
Well, it's one of the things that, right? It's awesome too, because he's got this, I think Tom Cruise will probably go down as one of the greatest movie stars in history. He just done so many crazy, wild things, but there was a plan and he worked the plan. And like, we've been talking about budgets and we've been talking about how to, create your financial wellness. And one of the things that I come back to with this Mission Impossible, you tell someone, hey, if you start investing money at, 65, you could have millions. It sounds like, I feel like that dun, 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 dun needs to start, because for so many people, that seems like a mission impossible. But the cool thing is like Tom Cruise, who's got this vision, I'm going to walk on the wings of a plane in a movie. And he's got this idea. And then he figures out the steps and he starts taking the steps, before you can. And there was this great interview. They asked him, how can you do this? And he's like, well, before you learn how to walk, you need to learn to crawl. After you learn to crawl, you learn, baby steps. After your baby steps, you learn to walk slowly. After you learn to walk slowly, you learn to jog. After you learn to jog, you learn to run. And then he's like, and then you can run in movies because you're Tom Cruise, And so, but I mean, it's like, there are these steps that you got to take. And, people might be sitting there and in the comments of our videos, people are going, teach me about investing. Teach me about this. Teach me about this. But what we're talking about are those Tom Cruise steps,
Yeah.
You got to start going through the steps and start learning each level before you go to the next.
Yeah, we're going to get there. And in my book, I actually start with the investing, because I know when it comes
People
to
want the
reading,
sexy
nobody has the patience to read 4 fucking chapters of budgeting, right? So the beauty of these podcasts, maybe when we're done, is that somebody can be like, yeah, fuck the budgeting stuff. I'm going straight to the investing. But we do have to build. I mean, it does need to be delivered in some fashion, because a lot of people don't have, or they don't believe that they have that excess cash, the difference between the cash coming in and cash going out. So we need to at least provide tools to allow people to start identifying areas where they can find space in their in their finances to allocate money to bigger things like, walking on the, not necessarily
Right.
like literally walking on the wings of a plane, but metaphorically, like getting to that place in life where they feel like they can do the impossible. Um, and I really like today's topic because it's like increment. It's just like we're talking about windfalls, and everybody's going to have these windfalls. It doesn't matter who you are. You're going to find yourself sometime in life with a windfall. And we're not talking about tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands, but even just like a few hundred or a few thousand every year is enough to start thinking about, like, what are you going to do when you get a raise and so forth. So I'm really fired up about today's topic. It's good stuff.
Yeah. Well, this video is kind of a response. We want we're following the plan, but we're also I want to like there were so many comments asking about this topic, so we're going to talk a little bit more about lifestyle creep and why it matters, because there were a ton of comments and people were like, okay, so yeah, and again to define lifestyle creep, it's when your spending increases as your income does. And it really is a kind of thing that it sneaks in, you know? You got these, a nicer apartment or more dinners out or just a tiny bit fancier vacation, Hey, I'm renting a car this weekend. I could get the compact, but it's only $10 more to get the upgrade, It's $10. And I had this guest come on that was talking to me about the 72 rule or something. And he's like, one of the things that he was looking at, it was like the investment, like, because you think it's $1,000 or $100. It's early in the morning for me. It's $100, right? Or $10. But if you look at the amount that would accrue over time, it's something like $6,000 or something like that. If you looked at by the time you retired, you're
Yeah.
25, this is $10 for you here, but it's this massive amount of money later on down the road.
Yeah.
I'm doing the math wrong, but
So,
yeah.
so we all do the math wrong, but and so like I'm gonna fucking do the math wrong
That's
right
$1
now.
billion after 5 weeks.
But so Professor G, I think his name is, the guy's just brilliant. Everything he says is just gold. But
Hats off to Prof G.
he talks about compound interest and investing. That doesn't really take a whole lot. And one of the examples that he uses, in fact, I should probably just like chat GPT this before we're done talking today. But one of the examples he uses is an iPhone. And he says, look, if you just, instead of buying the iPhone, right? So I've never owned an iPhone. I don't know how much they are, but I'm assuming they're somewhere probably around 1,500. But if you were to like be old enough to buy an iPhone when the first iPhone ever became available, and then continued to buy every new generation of iPhone, he was saying that if instead of buying every single generation of the iPhone, instead, if you were to invest, so just if it's 1,500 for the first gen iPhone, then if you were to take that 1,500, put it in the stock market, and then when the second generation came out, instead of buying the second generation, you took that 1,500 again and put it back in the stock market. And if you just put in the value of the iPhone every time a new iPhone was issued, you would be a millionaire, right?
Jeez.
Yeah. And so it's like, that is the perfect example of lifestyle creep, right? So it's wow, like there's this next gen iPhone and it's got all these brand new features. And boy, I need to have like those features. I gotta have those new features. And so you convince yourself that it's okay, or maybe whatever the rationale is, but you end up purchasing the iPhone instead of putting your money towards something else that might make you actually happier in the long run. If you were to just like think about this idea of as your income goes up or as things become available to you to purchase, instead of purchasing them, you allocate that money to investing, right? You're going to build a better sense of happiness for you in the long run, right? The
Yeah.
iPhone and the utility that it provides you is substantially lower than the utility of like having control over your own life, and having control over your own life is like the key to happiness.
100%. Well, and there's a huge degree of keeping up with the Joneses as well. I saw this funny poster this morning, or like picture on Instagram, and it's like the guy who buys the new iPhone when the new model comes out, and it's this old man, and he's wearing a shirt, and then he's like opened a package, and it's the exact same shirt that he's wearing. He's like, yeah, it's like he's just like awesome, and it's like, well, that's kind of the same, but it's like we see that so much. And again, though, I want to make a distinction too, about one thing too. I'm not hating on the newest iPhone, and I want to point out too, like some people, if you're a content creator, whatever in the world that means at this point in time, and your phone is your main tool, and you need that, for whatever you're doing, okay, and then
Yeah.
so be it. Go out and get that phone because it's going to help you create value. It's going to
Yeah.
make money.
Yeah.
But for most of us, like I've got a $150 phone, like that I purposely bought because it was cheap and it did everything I needed.
Same here.
Right? Yeah, and I looked at the features and I was like, do I need this? And I have, my wife gets one of those nice fancy ones, but that's because what she's doing, and when I send her out to places and I can't send someone to film her, I need her to
Yeah.
have something that's a professional grade camera in her pocket that her
Yeah.
assistant can just be like, we're going to film now. But that's because that's a need for her,
Yeah.
and again, like it gets back into those needs versus wants. Like for my daughter the other day, and this is like something that I just didn't think about when my guest came on and he was like talking about that compounding interest on some tiny small purchase. Like she wanted a skin. Now this is a thing. Like it sounds like very Silence of the Lambs. She wanted a different skin, and I was like, it puts the lotion on the body, And for you Gen Z who have not watched Silence of the Lambs, dude, go out and watch that movie.
Oh, yeah.
It is horrifically, terrifyingly awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, great movie.
One of the best
So
of all time.
hands down, that and Seven are two of the scariest, creepiest, because they could be real life.
Seven is an amazing. I love Seven's like one of my all-time favorite movies. Yeah.
Oh my God, right? We could have a whole podcast. We have a new challenge to find the financial principles in those two movies and make full podcasts on that. Okay, guys, these are the 7 deadly sins in Seven, and we're now going to talk about how those affect your finances. But going back to my daughter and her skins, God, that was a good tangent. That one has to be one of the best we've had in a while. My daughter was talking about the skins that she needed, and these things were $5 a pop. And I had that moment to sit there and go, Ilani, you do not need those. They are definitely a want. And she's like, but I have to look cool. And I couldn't sit there and lecture a 9-year-old about how the compounding interest on $5, if we invested that, she wasn't going to go for it. But for me, I could sit there and go, yeah, we're not buying that right now. But if she comes to me and says, you know what, I need a new backpack. And I'm like, why? The old one's, good enough. It's got a hole in the bottom. The hole is causing my books to fall. Just heard screaming outside. My wife and daughter are doing something wild. Probably exploring the new backpack I just bought my daughter because her old one had a hole in it. It was a want, a need, something that she actually needed. And I think like this is where it gets really gray. And like, I think that when people start really messing with the need category, right? And like, this is where lifestyle creep gets a little dangerous because those needs get inflated. Like, well, I need food. Do you need that caviar?
Yeah.
I mean, I know you got paid a little bit more this paycheck.
Yeah.
Do you need 18 different, outings to Chipotle this month? I mean,
Yeah.
it starts, the lifestyle creeps in, gets there quickly. And one of the things too is like, And I know people can easily identify the wants, yeah, maybe, the luxury car, the, impulse gadgets. Those are easier to see. But it's sometimes what I notice is that when the needs get inflated, that's where it comes in too,
Yeah. It's when you're thinking about, I agree with you. It's pretty easy to identify the difference between wants and needs. But
Yeah.
when you really start looking at needs, that analysis can be kind of weird because it's like, look, you need to have a place to live, right? And so that's
Yeah.
clearly your mortgage or your rent is clearly a need. However, is the amount that you are allocating to that need, is it reasonable? Right? So
Yeah.
is it reasonable to be spending, I don't know, like my next door neighbor just rented out his house and I was shocked. In fact, this was probably 5 years ago, but I was shocked at how expensive the house just next door to us rented out for. It's like $5,000 house.
Yeah.
And there's not really a whole lot there. It's crazy. But it's like, okay, well, if you are wanting to live in my neighborhood, is it reasonable to rent a house for 5,000 a month? Or is it more reasonable for you to, there's an apartment complex down the street it's not the greatest place. I mean, it's nice, but man, I would never want to live there. And you could probably rent a 2-bedroom apartment in that area for probably 3,000.
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, well, look, I can live in a house and I can pay 5, or I can rent an apartment down the street and pay 3. Like, what's the better decision? Like, I think everybody would agree that living in the house in the suburbs is the way to go. It's a bigger space. It's got a backyard. It's got more bedrooms. It just provides so much more value, like day to day. So it's hard to argue that it
Yeah.
wouldn't be reasonable and it's not a need, but like these are things that we do need to or think about
Yeah.
when we're trying to decide like how much is the amount that I need to be spending on each particular need. Because it could be the case that the opportunity cost associated with moving in the house is a pretty substantial cost, right? That 2,000 a month could be, if it were to be allocated to investing, like that's a substantial amount of money that we're talking about leaving off the table by renting a house. And how you measure that, man, it's different for everybody, but it's definitely one of those things where a lot of people will say, okay, these are needs. There's not a whole lot to think about with respect to needs because you have to have them in order to survive. But I think the conversation is a little bit more difficult. And I think this lifestyle creep is exactly what we want to be thinking about when we really are in the need bucket, right?
Yeah.
So for me personally, I was like, I think I mentioned it in the last podcast. I was always really lucky that I was hyper focused on my budget when I was moving through the beginning phases
Yeah.
of my career. And so, like a $5,000 raise, or if I remember moving from one company to another and getting like a $15,000 raise. And I was very meticulous and very detailed in like how I decided to use that additional 15,000. And for me personally, or me and my family, we decided that, taking a good portion of that and putting it into my 401k was the right decision for us. And looking back, man, I can't believe how lucky I was to be making those decisions because they paid off in spades. It's crazy. And so, like it's so easy to, and again, I think we were talking about this as well in a previous discussion, but when you graduate from college, a lot of us are in college and we're thinking the world is going to be so much easier when we're out of college. And so you graduate and man, reality just kind of slaps you in the face that, okay, you're not going to be living in the neighborhood that you wanted to be living in. You're not going to be driving the car that you had envisioned driving when you graduate. And so the life that you actually live just after graduation is substantially different than this vision that you had. And so, like, as you progress through your career and your income starts to go up, you start to, you almost rationalize that, man, I've been paying my fucking dues for years now. And it's
Mhm.
finally time for me to start reaping some of the rewards that I had envisioned. Like the whole reason I was going to college, I really want to go out, I really want to experience that life now. And so, yeah, when I get a $15,000 to $20,000 raise, or because I switch firms, I go up a big chunk of income. Like I'm gonna move into a nicer house, or I'm gonna buy a nicer car, or I'm gonna go out to dinner
Yeah.
more often than not, or I'm gonna go shop at Whole Foods instead of Trader Joe's, or whatever it is. It's hard. It's really hard, and so I don't think that we're trying to lecture that you shouldn't be doing those things, but you should at least understand the opportunity cost associated with things like renting the $5,000 house versus the $3,000 apartment. And if you were to go with the $3,000 apartment, I mean, everybody would agree it's not as nice day to day, but like what you're doing as a result of that is pretty profound, right? Like the guy who, like, I don't want to take us off topic too much, but the guy who
No,
came up with the phrase, money doesn't buy happiness, was just fucking buying the wrong things. Bec-
100%.
because money
He's just
does
never
buy
been broke,
happiness.
man.
Yeah.
Yes, it does.
Money buys, I don't care what anybody says, like,
Money
money
does
buys
buy
happiness.
happiness.
And in fact, I'm reading a book right now. I don't know if you've ever read it, but like I gotta take credit for anything I'm saying here, but I'm reading The Psychology of Money by a
Great
guy named,
book.
yeah, it is
Morgan something, right?
Morgan Housel. Like I'm probably
Yeah.
mispronouncing his name, but yeah, I'm reading this, and for the most part, it's like very theoretical. But man, he starts talking about this psychiatrist who's like trying to discover, what is it that makes people happy? And he did a study back in the 80s, and he concluded that, yeah, it's not income, it's not where you live, it's not geography, it's not even your educational level. Like all of those things, like there are plenty of people who are educated and are totally unhappy, and a lot of people
Yeah.
who make a lot of money who are not all that happy. And so he really tried to figure out what is it that makes, like what's the underlying characteristic across all of these different types of demographics. And he came to the conclusion that it's like having control, or having a sense that you have
Yes.
control over your life, right? Like that is that was like the most common underlying factor that made people happy, was like being able to do what you want, and do what you want when you want to, and do what you want when you want with who you want, right? That like
Yeah.
having control and having say over those things, and control over your life is like hugely powerful, and like leads to a big sense of self-worth and happiness. And so, money, you can't buy that, but money provides this intrinsic value. The author articulates that money really buys this, or provides this intrinsic value that allows you to like take more control over your life, right? So he's arguing
Yes.
that you build up a little bit, like, so we're not spending on, maybe we don't rent the $5,000 house, and instead we do move into the apartment, and we do that because we want to build up, a 6-month emergency fund. And that 6-month
Yeah.
emergency fund will alleviate a lot of anxiety if something were to happen that we weren't expecting, right? Or it could be the case that you build up enough wealth to where you're not so afraid of your boss when you go to work.
Right.
And you can choose to maybe look for another job. Or if you get laid off, you don't have to rush to some job that you may end up hating, or it's not a good choice for you. But instead, you can take your time and look for a job that is a better fit for you. Like if you have some emergency fund or some built up wealth, you can start making these decisions that are like going to benefit you like in the happy world for much longer. And so like you continue to build your wealth and you move away from things like, okay, not being afraid of your boss or having an emergency fund, but then maybe you can take some time off if you were to get sick. You wouldn't have to worry about rushing back to work and working while also getting treatment for whatever's ailing you. Or it could
Yeah.
be that you're taking longer vacations. Or it
Yeah.
could be that you're going to retire much earlier than when you anticipated. But like identifying money in your budget and allocating it to building wealth is a it's like a proven pathway to happiness. And so like,
100%.
you could be a coach, you could be the greatest coach. I don't know if you're a basketball fan, but my wife and I have been watching
I love it.
tons of basketball lately. And you see these coaches at like they call timeouts when if your team is getting its ass handed to you, the coach will call timeout. and and the coach isn't there saying, okay, well, like you guys got to score more, right? You got to put
Yeah.
the ball in the basket more times than the other team does. Like that's not what good coaching is. Right?
Yeah.
That's the outcome that we want, but that's not what good coaching is. Good coaching is like, and again, I know nothing about basketball. So I don't know what they would be saying in those timeouts, but I think that's what we're trying to do right now is like, it's just like, yeah, it's easy to say you should have money set aside for these emergencies. And I hope that we're like moving away from just the rah stuff and really diving into the nuts and bolts and the coaching of like, okay, well, how do I move? Like, how do I identify lifestyle creep? Right.
That's
So,
that's a good one.
so what if, it's like, okay, well, I want to, am I a victim of lifestyle creep and have I been, slowly, lowering my defenses and spending more when I shouldn't be like, how do I identify that? Like, maybe just like historically, is that something that we need to pay attention to? And do we need to like rectify it, or do we need to be more conscious about when the next tax refund comes in, or the next year end bonus from work comes in, or the next raise, or the next new job where you're making a little bit more? Like, how do we identify lifestyle creep? And
One of
there's
the things,
things that we
oh,
could
sorry.
talk about.
Yeah, I had seen like one of the things that I'd read about was upgrading without need. When they start upgrading without there being a need. And another thing too, like the companies have gone to are really pushing the subscriptions, like sign up for this. And I just had this email, do you want to continue your subscription? And I was like, damn, I didn't even know I had that. And I was like, "Shit, cancel that, right away." But then I sat there and I was like, "Man, how long has that been running and pulling $5, $10 out of my account every month without me realizing it?"
Yeah.
And the more of those that you get, the more of these unseen draws that you just have pulling out. And then, the biggest thing that I think of is that upgrading lifestyle, Um, I I had a friend who was, like, always really thrifty, and then he started making extra money, and then suddenly, everyone in his family had a Beamer. Everyone had a BMW, and again, no hating on the BMWs, but like, was it actually needed? And then he came to me one day and I was like talking to him. I said, "Well, how's life going?" He's like, "You know what? We're getting by." I was like, "How the hell are you just getting by, man? You make a lot of money." Well, he's like, "Well, we spend a lot too." And I was like, damn, that's a good thing to look at.
Yeah.
Because when you're spending a lot, it taxes yourself, it starts wearing on you. But like one of the things too is I think that like there has to be a degree of not giving a shit about what people say and pushing back on that. There was this great clip where I saw Christian Bale. Christian Bale still drives the same truck from the 90s that he had when I think he made it his first movie. It's like an old Toyota Tacoma or something. And one day someone was like, "Christian, why don't you upgrade your car?" And he was like, like typical Christian Bale, like, what the hell fashion. He was like, "What are you talking about? this car is amazing. And he went on for like 5 minutes about how wonderful his old Toyota was. And this was at the time period where it was like mid 2000s, early 2010s. And like he was just lampooning them about how great this Toyota was because it wasn't a classic yet.
Yeah.
Now it's considered a classic and everyone's like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, of course he's going to keep it because,
That,
yeah, it's 20 years old. But at that time, they're like, it's just an old truck. And, he was like, do I, he's like, I'm driving to work every day at movies and going home and I'm going to pick stuff up. He's like, this is literally the perfect thing that I need.
yeah.
And he didn't
Yeah.
give a crap what people said. He just
Dude.
drove a truck he loved.
So buying cars, like paying for, like, I'm not one of those car guys. Like, I
Yeah.
have a lot of friends who like really like cars, but I'm not one of those individuals. And again, like I'm convinced I lucked into my lot in life because because like I never cared what anybody thought about the car I drove. And when it comes to cars, this is like the perfect example of like not buying into lifestyle creep. Is like I owned my mom. I owned a a, uh, a Volkswagen thing for a long time. It was a convert.
Dude,
It's like those.
Volkswagen things are rad.
Yeah, it was the best car I've ever owned. It was awesome, but it broke down all the time, and it finally died, and I had to get a new car. My mom just like gave me her car. She's like, yeah, she drove a 240S. I think it was a 240SX Nissan, and this thing was the biggest piece of shit. Right? It like there was no the transmission just like if something burned in the transmission constantly and it would blow smoke into the cab of the car. So you would have to drive with the windows rolled down or you would die. I would die of asphyxiation. It was like so bad, right? And I was like, well, this thing is like on its last leg, so I'm just going to drive it until it no longer and this car, dude, it would not die. I'm convinced. I drove it for years with no oil in it. The brakes, like you would press on the brakes and it would like squeal like just the most insanely bad, metal on metal screeching. The muffler fell off. And so like my roommate's like, dude, I can hear you coming home miles away. Like I can hear you getting off the freeway. It's crazy. But so my buddy and I, who I was living with, we went to this party in LA and LL Cool J was there, Paula Abdul was there, a couple of other individuals were there, but Mel Gibson was there, right? This is awesome. It was at the Beverly Hills Four Seasons, and it was in the bar at the Beverly Hills Four Seasons. The valet guy wouldn't even let me out of my car. He was like, "Are you guys sure you're supposed to be here?" And I'm like, "No, yeah, we were invited. We're definitely supposed to be here." So anyway, this great party, lots of fun. We didn't meet any of the stars, but at the very end of the night, we gave the the valet my ticket, and the guy valet just like runs off to go get my car. And so we're waiting for the car. Me and my buddy are waiting for my car. And like Mel Gibson's entire entourage comes out and stands next to us, and they're all waiting for their car. And it is like the most amazing, models with this. This was like, back in like the early, actually probably late 90s, but like in the height of his career. And so he was
Yeah.
surrounded by all these beautiful people. And way off into the distance, you can hear my car like coming, through the valet parking lot. And my buddy's like, "Oh, hell no, dude. I am not getting into this car. I am not getting in your car in front of these people. Like, no way." So he like literally like ran off the premises. And the car pulled up and I had no problem getting into it, right? It was the biggest piece of shit. Finally, there's a point to the story. So I left LA. I moved to the Bay Area. I still drove the same car. And my partners were telling me like, dude, you cannot drive that car to work anymore, right? It's just like the associates here are driving nicer cars than that. Like clients can't see you in it. It's like you can't drive it anymore. And I was like, But here's the deal. Like, if I get rid of it, I have to go buy a new car and I'm going to have to make a car payment. And that's going to be, I don't know, at the time it was probably $250, $350 a month. And that would be money that I'm taking out of my investment category. And I would therefore have to put it in the car category. And I was not on board with that. As shitty as the car was, and as embarrassing as it was to drive it, in reality, it was like a big FU to everybody because every month that I drove that car was another $250 to $350 that I was putting into the stock market. And
There you go.
the decision paid off in spades for me. And it was just because I don't know that I don't know that I would say I was too cheap, but I would say that it's just like I appreciated the opportunity cost associated with buying a new car. And I just couldn't justify the idea of like spending $350 on a new car when I had a car that like provided all of the needs that it needed. It got me to work every day. It never broke down. It's totally fine. Oddly enough, the car got stolen from me. Right. So I
Someone
walked
wanted it.
so I walked out of my house. The reason I got rid of it was that I walked out of my house and the car was gone. It was gone. And so I walked back in.
The universe was like, it's
It's
time.
so I called work and I was like, "Hey, I'm not going to be in today because I have no way to get there. My car was stolen." And everybody at work was like, "Fuck, come on, dude! Like, there's no way anybody stole your car. That's the lamest excuse. Nobody ever wants that car." And I was like, "I have no idea, dude. They stole it." Like, and so the police came up. Turns out that somebody wanted it for the tires, right? So I had new tires on it. And so kids that were into street racing stole the car to steal the tires. But anyway, it's a long
And
way.
hopefully didn't asphyxiate in the process.
I'm like, when I get the car back, I'm going to put 4 brand new tires on it and like I live on a hill and I'm like, I'm going to cut the brake line so they can steal my car again. And when they get down to the bottom of the hill, there will be no brakes.
There you go. There you
But
go. One way or the other.
it was, again, like to get back kind of on topic, it was my way. It was really my way of forcing myself not to give in to the idea that as my income went up, so should my, even though I had a stronger buying power, like I was really forcing myself and I was really conscious of like, where's my money going? What are my main priorities? And I agree that this car is kind of embarrassing and it would be nice to drive a nicer car. But for me personally, the opportunity cost again was so high that I just didn't feel like I wanted to until I absolutely had to. And I think that's
Yeah.
what we're really kind of getting at.
100%. V, take the dog with you. His paws of our. My wife just walked in. I'm going to segue then from that because one of the things too is like I love that story and that car story is absolutely awesome. I think that's pretty close to taking the cake from the guitar story and the girlfriend in the truck. So it's pretty awesome. But one of the things there that you were talking about, and I think that we need to bring people back to because in our last episode that we talked about that gap. So we have the money in, money out, and the gap. And
Yeah.
one of the things that you really want to do is you're focusing on is you're putting that gap to work. And we're really making sure that we get as much of that extra money into the things that we want, instead of the things that are just pulling on them. Because if you can really make sure that you're allocating that money to where it could be going, it can be going to increasing investments or emergency funds, paying off debt, or like saving for long-term things that you want to do. But like, you got to focus on that. And I was reading up about some ways to avoid lifestyle creep. And these were kind of interesting. I want to run some of these by you. Number one, and this is one that I like to use, it's to set a lifestyle cap. And I was like, one of the things that I had to start doing for myself was especially now because in In Vietnam, they're all doing everything is purchases through QR codes. Everyone's scanning. It's like it's touchless pay but they're doing it with QR codes here, right? So I had to sit there and go back to the envelope method. I was like, this is Sean's money for the week. This is what I'm allowed to use
Nice.
this week. Because, dude, otherwise
Yeah.
I'm like, hey, yeah, I didn't spend that much this week. I'm on budget. But then suddenly I look at my budget
Yeah.
and it gets out away from me. So it kind of like the setting a lifestyle
Yeah.
cap was advice number one. And the idea is it's committing to living on a lower percentage of your income than you would have, so it's like, this is what I've got this week. And, it doesn't have to be the envelope method, but it can be just like you're setting a cap. This is what I'm able to use this month for whatever.
Yeah. Yeah. So I use the envelope approach. My finances are so complicated at the moment. There are so many moving parts. Like I've got my daughter lives in Chicago, my son lives at home, but he's going to a local school, and so we're paying for all these different things. And so it's really hard for me to like just even get a sense of what our money, like what specific categories we're spending money on. And then not only is it hard to identify what we're spending on, but like how do you control,
Right.
other people in the family? How do you force them to stay on budget and so forth? So what I realized actually as a result of doing these podcasts is that, man, I actually use the envelope approach, and I also use this approach that we call pay yourself first. And
Yes.
so the paying yourself first and the envelope approach, it's like the hybrid approach that I use, where I'm just like, okay, listen, the main priority for us as a family at the moment is getting both of our kids through college. Like just
Yeah.
making sure that we can pay. And my daughter's school at the moment is really expensive. It's like 90,000 a year. And so we just allocate a certain portion of our income every month to a specific account. And that account is only used for making tuition payments, rent payments for my daughter, tuition payments for my son. But we're using that account. We're putting in the same amount every month, and we just spend from that account only. And it's really what you're talking about. It's the envelope approach. And I sort of let everything else, like the whole idea between needs and wants, that's such a complicated thing to to
Right.
to address in my family. It's almost impossible. And so what we focus on is just making sure that we can cover the day to day. There's we're all pretty conscious about how much we have available to us to spend, but like let's just make sure that we're getting the portion of our income into the account that's our biggest priority right now, and that's the college education fund.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I'm totally on board with the envelope approach. It's
Well, and
such a nice way to avoid or manage lifestyle creep.
you also poked at like pay yourself first, and like the idea there would be to automate money into your savings right away. So
Yeah,
like you're taking money out and going, okay, no matter what happens, before you even see it in your account, people will set it up so that it automates 15 to 20% of your income straight into savings, straight
yeah,
into
yeah,
that future
yeah,
future fund for whatever it is that you
yeah,
need it for.
yeah. Dude, so that's exactly how, the car story's funny, and it definitely helped. But the the single best thing I did to avoid lifestyle creep, and somebody gave me this advice really early in my career. They were saying, "Hey, listen, you know, when you need to start putting money into your 401k, okay? And the goal is to put, 15% up to a max of whatever it was at the time." And I couldn't afford it. Like I didn't have that much. I wasn't making a whole lot, and so I couldn't survive by putting the maximum amount into my 401k. So what I did was I said, okay, listen, I can put in, 7% of my income now. Okay. However, when I get a raise, my entire raise is going to go straight to my 401k. All right. So I would get, I don't remember what my raises were, but they weren't all that great in the earlier years. So maybe I earned an extra 7,000. I took that 7,000 and I put it into my 401k and I said, look, if I was living last year off of, $60,000 a year, then this year I'm going to continue living off of the $60,000 a year. And even though I'm making 67 now, I'm just going to take that extra 7 and put in my
Yep.
401k. And again, it's very similar to the envelope approach and the pay yourself first approach, where it's just like, yeah, like I'm not gonna buy into because I'm making more, I'm just gonna start spending more on things that don't make a whole lot of sense in the long
Yeah.
run for me. So yeah, pay yourself first, envelope approach is huge. Oh, I'm interested in hearing, do you have anything else that you've gleaned from how to avoid or recognize lifestyle? Because I feel like I want to bring something up, but I'm curious to see if you have a second
To
topic.
recognize lifestyle creep. When I start thinking about buying more, the thing that I have to do is the 24-hour rule. The 24-hour rule means to
Yes.
stop.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably better 48-hour rule because, dude, I am so bad at this. And I can list off in the past month and a half the things that I wanted to buy, but I gave myself 48 hours to calm the hell down
Yeah.
and just to sit there. All right, so there was the Bengal cat
Yep.
that I wanted for my daughter. I was like, we need a Bengal cat. There
Yes.
was the golden Labrador puppies that were awesome and cute and would have made my life very sunny and fun. But I sat there after 48 hours and go, dude, I don't need another dog. There was the extra computer that I wanted to buy, not the one that I bought, but
Yeah.
hey, this is a
Yeah.
good deal. I should buy two.
Yeah.
I didn't buy it, but man, I was about ready to. I was sitting there
Yeah.
going, I had my finger on the button and I said, 48 hours, 48 hours, slow down. And I didn't. And it would have been excessive. It was a great deal, but it
Yeah.
was not something I needed. And that would
Yeah.
have gotten me some credit card payments for a couple months that I
Yeah.
didn't want because
Yeah.
of the cash. I had set aside cash for the one computer, but not for the
Yeah.
second one,
Yeah.
And like, so for me, the 48-hour rule or 24-hour rule, whatever it is, to slow the hell down is a big one.
It's huge. That's literally putting your fiance in the trunk of the car, right? It's like
Right?
you're trying to make good decisions, but you're doing it in an impaired state, right? So you're in that
Yeah.
frenzy and you're not really and it could be micro stuff too, right? So it happens everywhere all the time. Right? When I'm a huge movie fan, so like your movie analogies are not lost on me.
Oh, thank God.
And man, there's like, man, what better reason to go to the movies than to buy popcorn? And so like you'll
Yeah.
order popcorn and it's like, yeah, okay, I'll get a medium popcorn. And just right there, the kid who's filling up the popcorn is like, hey, for an extra 45 cents, you can move from the medium to the large. And you're like, oh, yeah, okay, well, that sounds good. And then they're like,
Yeah.
okay, well, you can bundle it with a soda and you'll get the soda for half price. And you're like, yeah, that sounds good. Right. And so, like, you're being led into it's like, fuck, all I wanted was a medium popcorn, and I'm walking out with a big ass tub that I definitely didn't need, a soda, and maybe maybe some licorice. And it's just because we're in that frenzied state, and your
Yeah.
idea that you want to just like obviously you can't take 24 hours to decide whether or not you're going to go with the large popcorn, but like those bigger ticket items, yeah, like you don't need to be like, I promise you, like whatever sale somebody's pitching to you, right? They're going to be telling you it's there's an expiration date and it's not going to be available to you. And it's only not going to be available to you until the next reason to have a sale comes along.
Yep.
And so like this idea that you really need to jump on something because it's a good deal in the moment, man, it's just a ploy to separate you from your money. And so like
Yeah.
you really want to take, and look, you want to spend those 24 hours, and we're not going to be spending the 24 hours like pissing around and like seeing if we feel any different. The 24 hours really needs to be dedicated to like, is this a want or is it a need? Okay. And
Yeah.
if it is a want, and if it's something that I would just prefer to have that I don't necessarily need, then if I buy this, what am I, what are the opportunity costs associated with this particular want? And like, how closely is this particular want aligned with my main priorities? Right. So again, if I want to like have an emergency fund so that if something terrible were to happen to me and I was not able to work for 6 months, do I want that freedom or do I want the new computer? Like, I'm
Yeah.
just going to spend 24 hours thinking about which one of those is more important to me, right?
Yeah.
And maybe it's not the 6 month emergency fund, maybe it's something else. But the idea is that we really want to like really consciously think about what we're spending money on and how it falls in line with the big priorities. And so
There
waiting
was a
more 40 hours is huge. That's another
100%.
yeah, wherever you're getting this information from, it's golden, right?
Right? Well, the couple of the guests that came and dropped some of these wisdom bombs on me. There was one more like that I had seen online, but it was also something my guest said, and this was like um to make sure that because we're talking about we wants versus needs, and it seems like we're vilifying wants, at some point in time. And I want to like that's not it though. Like it's to classify these wants. Are these things that you really because and then budget for it, so if you have wants, like certainly it's okay to have some wants, man, and put the money aside for it. But it's also that you've paid yourself first. You're still operating in that living under your means type of a mindset. You're
Yeah,
doing this 48-hour thing, but then you're also setting aside some money for those wants. And like for me, we were like sitting there looking, and I just sat there and said, you know what? A Bengal cat is not what we it's not the want that I want, you know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah,
It obviously was a want, but, like, at the end of the day, I also want other things, and those other things I wanted took precedent, because
yeah,
I had an amount that was set aside for my wants, and I
yeah,
said, "You know what? For right now, I want to have an extra editor because that actually brings me more value, and I
yeah,
would prefer to spend that money on
yeah,
an extra editor this month
yeah,
than having the Bengal cat. Oh, it's
yeah,
rad. Though they're
yeah,
awesome. Who
yeah,
doesn't want a
totally.
Bengal cat?
E-
But,
every good, efficient business on the face of the earth uses all of these tools to compete in the marketplace. And so so companies are in the business of making money for the owners, right? And so they can't just like, you can't, if you're a company, you can't pursue every new idea that comes along, right? You have to pick
right.
and choose what strategies you're going to employ moving forward because there's just a limited amount of capital, right? If
Yeah.
you're Apple or any of these massive companies that have excess capital, you can do whatever you want, okay? But
Yeah.
the smaller up and coming companies, they have to pick and choose like what it is they're going to sink their money invest in because they just don't have enough resources to pursue everything. And so we're taking these like well established things that are like proven in business and that are written about in like textbooks in finance for really sophisticated individuals at these really big companies, and we're just like dumbing down, so to speak, the concepts and applying it to our personal lives. And all we're saying is like, we can't buy everything that we want, right? If you can buy everything that you want, you probably aren't listening to our crazy stories at the moment. But like, if you do have limited resources, I think all we're saying is like, I think you're right. We're not saying to not spend your money on wants, right? We're just saying that like, think about what it is you want and like
100%.
prioritize, you know, create a list of priorities and just make sure that your money and your spending habits fall in line with your priorities. And we've talked about this again, in the past, that none of us wake up in the morning and we're like, I'm gonna be a fucking loser today. Right?
Yeah,
Nobody's
right?
nobody's gonna approach life with that mantra. But yet we actually do wake up and spend the day in a losing fashion because a lot of times we're not really conscious about the idea that like the Bengal cat isn't quite as much of a want as, a new editor. And so like just paying attention to that is how you win in this.
Well, I want to I want to come back to something that you said earlier, which I think is probably one of the gems and the absolute jewels of this episode. And that was that like the goal is freedom, not just more stuff.
Yeah.
Like you
Yeah.
want that. There's this great John Goodman clip where he's talking to I think it's like, dude, was it I don't know. He's talking to this one actor. I think that it was oh my God, what's the kid from Good Will Hunting? Matt Damon. I
Matt
can always
Damon.
remember Matt Damon. Yeah, he was talking to, I think it was Matt Damon, and he's talking about like the secret of life. And he's like, you know what? It's FU money. You want to have that point where you can just tell people to go screw themselves, and it's like real wealth is going to be control over your time and your future, not just the things that you're getting. It's like, I had my day job wasn't able to get me hours, and I'm sitting here and I was complaining to them and I said, guys, you're hiring extra people that are part-time to kind of fill in these gaps, and I'm full-time and you're not able to give me a full schedule right now.
Yeah.
And my supervisor is very political, and he came back with the political answer, and he's just doing his job. He is
Yeah.
who he is, right? Yeah. I'm not going to hate on him. He's in the system as well. But you know what? I wanted to be. And then he's like, well, would you mind transferring to another center if we can't get you the hours? And that was just like, I want to get you out of my hair because
Yeah.
you're stressing me out right now, asking for something that this and that, and you're
Yeah.
causing issues because you're speaking up. And
Yeah.
what I really wanted to do, I was talking to my wife right now. I wanted to be like, fuck you.
Yeah.
I'm leaving and going
Yeah.
to another place. But like, because and this is again why I'll say this a million times, I haven't done things correctly and I'm working on fixing them.
Yeah.
And I'm making smarter moves right now, but I didn't prepare that. And I really, really, really want for all of our listeners to sit there and not be in this situation that I'm in right now, like where I don't have the freedom to go. This that great movie. I think it's called Dazed and Confused, where the guy's
Yeah.
getting fired and he's like, fuck you, fuck you, fuck you. You're cool and fuck you. And then he walks out of the job. And I remember watching that, and our whole generation watched that and said, yeah,
Fuck
yeah,
dude.
that's what I want.
Yeah. Everybody, everybody, everybody gives me the hardest time about the title of my book. Everybody's like, it cannot say fuck you money. Like you have to change the title of your book. And it's like
No.
two things. First, you don't get it. Okay. Like
Yeah.
you totally
Right.
miss the point. It's like fuck you money is the holy grail. Like that is exactly like
Yeah.
saving for retirement and like all of these other couching the same concept but in just like fluffier ways is missing the point, right? It's like the main goal is to, like the guy said, this, what's his name, Morgan House and Angus Campbell, they're saying the key to happiness is having control over your own life. And so like not changing the title of my book, because the more I read, the more I'm convinced that it's the right title. It is
100%.
exactly what we need to be moving towards. And then I tell people, I can't change the title because I've got the title tattooed to my forearm. And so if I change the title, it's like, well, there was a stupid tattoo. But anyway.
No, it's a fucking perfect tattoo.
I was gonna I was going to say one thing. I don't know if we have time, but
Do it.
um, it's like lifestyle creep is very easy to like manage and pay attention to if you're single and young, but it's really hard. It's really, really hard to like if you were to ask yourself, boy, over the last 5 years, am I guilty of lifestyle? Like, have I been spending more than I needed to? Like, maybe I should sit down and try to figure out if I've spent, like, if I'm guilty of lifestyle creep. And what is difficult is like as we move through life, our lives totally change. Okay. So like our
Yeah.
priorities are going to change and that's going to change our spending, but like our situations in life are going to change. So for me personally, I was very conscious of lifestyle creep and how I wanted to allocate my money. But boy, then you get married and then we had our first kid. And so, just having a kid just makes things so much more expensive. And then having
Yes,
a
it does.
second kid makes things really expensive. And then my wife and I made the choice to have her stay home with the kids. She really wanted to. And we just like as a family, we felt like that was the right decision for us. So like our income went down and our spending went up. And so man, how do you determine whether your increase in spending is something like is that lifestyle creep or is it just yeah we're spending more because our life is just drastically different than what it was 3-4 years ago. So
Right.
the idea of lifestyle creep, it's easy to talk about in a podcast, but to like sit down and try to figure out if you're guilty of spending more. I mean, some of us will have a gut feeling, but if we feel like we're sort of conscious of the way that we spend our money and we want to sit down and try to identify, are we actually spending more because we're making more? Man, that's a hard question to answer, right? You have
Right.
things like inflation. So like, again, it's just like from one month to the next, that's kind of I wouldn't really rest my hat on, oh man, I'm guilty of lifestyle creep because in June I spent more than I spent in May. Like things are just going to happen periodically that are going to make one month substantially or slightly different than the next. But so
Right.
then maybe it makes sense to compare one year to the other. But even then it becomes difficult because things just become more expensive. And so you know, living off of 60,000 last year is impossible this year because of inflation, right?
Yeah. Right.
It's just like things just cost more. And so like, yeah, I spent 60,000 last year and this year I spent 65,000, but boy, I didn't feel like, and I certainly didn't spend more than I needed to. It's just that things got more expensive. Or it could be that you know, there was something unexpected that happened in one year that didn't happen in the other year. And so like just looking at the amount that you spend may not be the right way to go because maybe you had to, put a down payment on a new car, or maybe there were medical expenses that you had in one year. So like these comparisons from one year, like from one month to the next are difficult. And then from one year to the other are also very difficult. And so it's not something that I think you can move away from this discussion and go quickly look at your finances and be like, oh, okay. I'm like
Right.
massive. I was like, I can't believe how guilty I am of this idea. Like it's not really that easy. And I think again, you know, the more that we're paying attention to these types of things,
That's it.
um, the more likely it is that we're going to avoid it. And so, you know, the day to day spending is something to keep in mind with. But for me, what really helped me was the big bumps, right? So I was always I was always the guy that wanted to have more taxes taken at withheld from my paychecks so that I would get a refund at the end of the year. And so the
Yeah.
refund at the end of the year allowed me an opportunity to like, it was kind of like a forced savings to where I was like, okay, if I got $10,000 refund, where's that going to? Like, maybe we want to take a family vacation or maybe
Yeah.
we want to do something specific with that money. That was one way that I dealt with it. The other way I think was again just like mapping out specific categories of spending. So I would maybe look at, instead of looking at all the money I spend, maybe I'm just going to look at the food category. And from
Yeah.
one net year to the next, like, what does my food spending look like? Right. And even though like I have a new family, maybe we have two kids, and so food is obviously going to be more expensive, but is there some way to just at least look at one line item and be able to identify areas of improvement or areas for concern and so forth, rather than looking at the totals at the end of the year?
Well, I think that's where like the idea it's all about making the unconscious conscious, and I think that, because it is like Tom Cruise, like how can we go from here to here? It's like this big jump. Be like, how am I going to start learning to walk on airplane wings? But it's like you can start going, all right, in this moment, what can I do? In this moment, what can I change? In this
Yeah.
moment, I'm feeling like buying that, new Ferrari. Well, that's the thing that you start looking at and just
Yeah.
start thinking about, because there is so much that you can't plan for. And that stuff just happens naturally. But it's the stuff that you can and the stuff that's conscious that I think is where we can start, making the differences. And I think that if you can start bringing some of these concepts to the forefront, then it makes it easier in the long run, you know?